You're sitting around a table in a restaurant you used to visit all the time, back when everyone lived in the same city. It's been a long time since you've all been together like this. Careers happened. Families happened. Life spread everyone out in different directions. The conversation drifts from catching up to work stories. Someone talks about a promotion. Someone else mentions moving to a new place. Another friend laughs about how expensive daycare has become. Then, almost casually, the topic shifts to money. Not in a tense way. No one is arguing. It's just the kind of conversation that happens when adults who have known each other for years start comparing life paths. One person says they've been putting more into retirement lately. Another mentions that they finally paid off a loan. And then someone, almost as an afterthought, says something like, "We're getting close to the number." Everyone at the table understands exactly what that means. You smile. You nod. You raise your glass. But on the drive home, that sentence keeps replaying in your mind. Getting close to the number. You start doing quiet math in your head while the highway lights pass by. You make decent money. You're not reckless. You have a retirement account somewhere. You've tried to do the responsible things. So why does it feel like you're running on a treadmill while other people are slowly moving toward a finish line you can't quite see? The strange thing about wealth in America is that most of the time it doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like private jets or billionaires on magazine covers. For most people, the real story happens quietly. It's hidden inside small decisions repeated over long stretches of time. The difference between households that slowly build wealth and households that always feel like they're starting over isn't usually one giant moment. It's a pattern. And those patterns often form during a window of life when nobody is really paying attention. Picture someone we'll call Derek. Derek isn't a stereotype. He isn't irresponsible. He isn't reckless with money. In fact, if you met him, you'd probably think he's doing just fine. He works in a stable field. He earns a respectable income. When he started his job years ago, he filled out all the paperwork they handed him during orientation. Somewhere in that stack was a retirement form. He checked a few boxes, signed his name, and moved on. At the time, retirement felt like a distant concept, something older people talked about. Life had more immediate concerns. Rent, groceries, car insurance, trying to save a little money without feeling like every dollar had to be locked away. For a while, Derek assumed that simply having a retirement account meant he was doing the right thing. Years passed, work got busier, responsibilities grew. Like many people, Derek intended to learn more about investing someday. He even bookmarked a few articles. But life has a way of filling every empty space in the calendar, and somehow, someday kept moving further down the road. Eventually, Derek got married. The combined income helped. They moved into a slightly bigger place. The furniture improved. Weekends included better restaurants and short trips that felt like rewards for working hard. None of these choices were extreme. They were simply small upgrades that made life feel a little better. The thing about lifestyle changes is that they rarely feel like mistakes. Each one feels reasonable. You work hard, so you move to a nicer apartment. You've been driving the same car for years, so you upgrade. You start ordering dinner more often because cooking every night after a long day gets exhausting. Individually, none of these decisions look like financial sabotage. Together, they quietly reshape your entire financial trajectory. For Derek, life continued unfolding the way it does for millions of people. A house eventually entered the picture. There was excitement, paperwork, and the surreal moment of holding keys to a place that finally felt permanent. Owning a home changed things in subtle ways. Suddenly there were maintenance projects, a lawn to take care of, repairs that arrived at inconvenient moments. At the same time, income kept rising. Promotions happened. Raises appeared. Every increase felt like progress. But something strange was happening beneath the surface. The lifestyle expanded almost automatically to match the new income. A slightly nicer car. A vacation that cost a little more than the previous one. Subscriptions that felt small individually but stacked together quietly. The money wasn't being wasted. It was simply being absorbed. This pattern has a name: lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the most powerful forces shaping financial outcomes in modern life. The tricky part is that it disguises itself as success. From the outside, it looks like someone's life is improving. And in many ways, it is. But wealth doesn't grow from appearances. It grows from what remains after everything else is paid. Somewhere along the way, Derek realized something unsettling. Despite years of steady work and increasing income, his savings didn't feel dramatically larger than they had years earlier. There was always something: a repair, a bill, an unexpected expense, a moment where money flowed out faster than it came in. For many households, this cycle becomes the background noise of adulthood. You earn more. Life costs more. The gap between income and long-term savings barely moves. And yet, at dinner tables across the country, there are always a few people quietly drifting in the opposite direction. They're not necessarily earning dramatically more. They're not necessarily working harder. But something about their system works differently. The truth is that wealth accumulation is often less about intelligence and more about structure. The way money flows automatically. The way certain decisions remove the need for constant discipline. For example, people who save money automatically before they ever see it tend to accumulate far more than those who try to save whatever remains at the end of the month. Not because they're better people, because the system does the work for them. Automation changes behavior. Another quiet divider in financial life is housing, not because houses themselves magically create wealth, but because ownership changes habits. When people own their homes, they often stay in one place longer. Stability allows other financial decisions to compound. Payments gradually build equity. Over time, that equity becomes a form of forced saving. Renters, on the other hand, often face a different rhythm. Rent can rise unpredictably. Moves happen more frequently. Saving requires deliberate effort rather than structural momentum. Neither path is inherently right or wrong. But the long-term outcomes can look very different. There are other forces shaping the story as well: student loans, car payments, medical expenses. These aren't moral failings. They're realities of modern life. Debt, however, has a unique effect on wealth. It redirects future income toward past decisions. Money that could be growing in investments instead flows backward toward balances that shrink slowly over time. For many people, the first decade of adulthood becomes a to-go-for between building forward and paying backward. That tension can delay wealth building for years. But the most powerful force in personal finance isn't income. It's time. Time allows small decisions to echo across decades. Money invested early has a chance to compound again and again, quietly multiplying without any additional effort. Money invested later has far less time to grow. This is why two people earning similar incomes can end up with dramatically different outcomes, not because one person was brilliant and the other careless, but because one started earlier, or automated savings sooner, or avoided certain forms of debt, or simply allowed compounding to work longer. Returning to Derek's story, the turning point didn't arrive as a sudden windfall. It arrived as a moment of clarity. One evening he sat down with his partner and opened their financial accounts on a laptop. They looked at everything honestly: retirement balances, savings, debts. For the first time, they stopped guessing and started calculating. The numbers weren't catastrophic, but they weren't comforting either. What they realized was something many people discover in midlife: the future doesn't change unless behavior changes. From that moment forward, they made several quiet adjustments. Nothing dramatic, just consistent choices. They increased retirement contributions. They redirected raises toward investments instead of lifestyle upgrades. They paid closer attention to where money flowed each month. None of these changes felt exciting. In fact, they felt boring. And that's the secret nobody advertises. Wealth building is usually boring. It doesn't look impressive in the moment. It looks like saying no to certain upgrades. It looks like keeping the same car a little longer. It looks like automatically investing money every month without checking the balance constantly. but those boring choices slowly reshape the future. Years pass. Accounts grow. Debt shrinks. Options expand. Eventually, Derek attended another dinner with friends. This time, the conversation drifted toward the same topic again: retirement, savings, future plans. Someone mentioned getting close to the number. And Derek realized something surprising. For the first time, that sentence didn't feel like it belonged to someone else's life. Because wealth isn't built in dramatic leaps. It's built through systems that quietly push money in the right direction for years. Most millionaires in America didn't inherit fortunes. Most didn't build tech startups. They followed a surprisingly ordinary pattern. They invested consistently. They avoided lifestyle explosions when income increased. They allowed compounding to do the heavy lifting. None of those habits make exciting headlines, but together they shape the financial future of millions of households. The truth is, the finish line people talk about at dinner tables isn't a secret club. It's the cumulative result of thousands of small decisions. Decisions about raises, about spending, about saving before spending instead of after. Every year that passes either strengthens that system or weakens it. And the remarkable thing about compounding is that it rewards patience more than brilliance. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need genius investment strategies. You just need consistency. The most powerful financial move most people can make isn't finding the perfect investment. It's simply building a structure where investing happens automatically, month after month, year after year. Over time, that quiet discipline becomes momentum. Momentum becomes security. And security becomes freedom. The kind of freedom that lets someone sit at a dinner table years later, smile at the conversation about money, and realize something comforting. They're not chasing the number anymore. They're slowly approaching it. And over time, something interesting starts to happen. The stress around money slowly fades into the background. Not because expenses disappear or because life suddenly becomes perfectly predictable, but because the system finally starts working with you instead of against you. Most people spend years trying to solve financial problems with motivation. They promise themselves that next month they'll save more. Next year they'll finally start investing seriously. When the next raise comes, that will be the moment everything changes. But motivation is temporary. Systems are permanent. The people who eventually reach financial stability usually aren't the ones who had the most motivation. They're the ones who quietly built systems that removed the need for motivation entirely. Money gets invested automatically. Savings happen before spending. Debt gets paid down in structured, predictable ways. And because these systems run in the background, life continues normally while wealth slowly accumulates. Think about how different that feels compared to the typical experience. For many households, every financial decision feels like a trade-off. Every purchase feels like it needs justification. Every unexpected expense creates tension. But once a system is in place, the emotional pressure decreases. Bills get paid, investments grow, savings build. Life becomes less about reacting and more about planning. And this shift often happens gradually, almost quietly. There isn't usually a dramatic moment where someone suddenly realizes they've made it. Instead, there are small realizations scattered across years. A moment when checking the retirement account feels less intimidating. A moment when an unexpected expense doesn't trigger panic. A moment when someone notices that their savings account keeps growing even when they're not actively thinking about it. Those small moments add up. Another thing people eventually discover is that wealth changes how time feels. When money is tight, time often feels rushed. Every decision feels urgent. Every bill has a deadline attached to it. But when financial stability grows, time begins to feel a little more flexible. Options appear. You can stay in a job because you enjoy it rather than because you desperately need the paycheck. You can take a break if life requires it. You can make choices based on long-term happiness instead of short-term survival. This is what people are really talking about when they mention the number. It's not actually about a specific dollar amount. It's about reaching a point where your life isn't entirely controlled by financial pressure, where your investments begin to support your lifestyle instead of the other way around. But here's the part that surprises many people. The path to that point rarely looks glamorous. It often involves doing ordinary things for a very long time, consistently investing a portion of income, avoiding lifestyle upgrades that don't actually improve happiness, being intentional about debt, choosing stability over constant financial experimentation. These choices rarely feel exciting in the moment, but over time they become powerful, because every year that passes strengthens the compounding effect. Money invested today begins working for future versions of you. It generates returns, which generate their own returns, and the cycle repeats. And while this process is happening, life continues moving forward. Careers evolve. Children grow up. Homes get older. New opportunities appear. Through all of it, the financial system quietly keeps running in the background. Eventually, people start to notice something interesting. The gap between effort and results begins to shrink. In the early years of saving and investing, progress feels slow. Contributions feel small compared to the size of the goal. But after enough time passes, the investments themselves begin doing most of the work. Growth accelerates. Balances change faster. Momentum builds. This is why the early years matter so much. Not because the contributions are massive, but because they create the foundation that everything else grows from. Every year that passes without that foundation simply means the structure has to be built later. And building later is always harder. Still, it's important to remember something that financial conversations often ignore. Life rarely follows a perfect plan. People lose jobs. Markets fall. Unexpected expenses appear. Families go through changes. These events can interrupt even the most carefully designed financial strategy. But systems are resilient. A person who has built consistent saving and investing habits can recover from setbacks far more easily than someone starting from scratch each time. Because the structure already exists. The habits already exist. All that's required is restarting the process. That's why the most valuable thing someone can build isn't a large bank balance. It's a repeatable financial routine. A routine that works during good years and continues during difficult ones. Over decades, that routine becomes the engine that powers long-term wealth. If you look closely at people who eventually reach financial independence, their stories usually share a similar rhythm. They began with uncertainty. They made adjustments along the way. They stuck with simple strategies longer than most people would have. And they allowed time to amplify their efforts. None of those steps required extraordinary talent. They required patience. And patience is one of the rarest financial skills in the modern world. Because the world constantly encourages the opposite. New investment trends appear every year. Headlines promise quick wealth. Social media showcases lifestyles that seem far beyond ordinary incomes. All of it creates the illusion that financial success must happen quickly to be meaningful. But real wealth rarely grows that way. It grows quietly, over long stretches of time, often unnoticed by everyone except the person building it. And one day, sometimes decades after the process began, the result becomes visible. Someone looks at their accounts and realizes the system they built years earlier has finally matured. Their investments generate meaningful income. Their debts are manageable or gone. Their financial future feels stable instead of uncertain. At that point, the conversation around money changes. It's no longer about survival. It's about choices. Choices about work. Choices about time. Choices about how to spend the years ahead. And perhaps the most satisfying part is knowing that none of it came from luck. It came from years of consistent, often boring decisions that slowly accumulated into something powerful. If Derek could speak to his younger self now, he probably wouldn't offer complicated advice. He wouldn't talk about predicting markets or chasing perfect opportunities. He would say something much simpler. Start early. Automate everything you can. Let time do the heavy lifting. And most importantly, don't underestimate how powerful small decisions become when you repeat them for decades. Because the story of wealth isn't written in a single moment. It's written gradually, 1 year at a time, in the quiet choices most people barely notice while they're making them. And somewhere down the road, at another dinner table with old friends, the conversation might drift toward money again. Someone will casually mention getting close to the number. This time, instead of wondering how they did it, you'll understand exactly why. Because by then, you'll recognize the pattern. And you'll realize that the same quiet process has been unfolding in your own life all along. And as the years move forward, something even more subtle begins to change. Your relationship with money itself starts to evolve. In the beginning, money feels emotional. It feels urgent. Every dollar has a job and every decision carries weight. When you're starting out, money feels like something you constantly chase. But once you build a structure around it, money begins to behave differently. It becomes quieter, less dramatic. Instead of something you're always reacting to, it becomes something that moves steadily in the background of your life. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It unfolds slowly, often without you noticing at first. 1 month you realize your savings account stayed intact even after a surprise expense. Another month, you notice that your investments grew more than you expected. Then one day you open your accounts and realize something that would have seemed impossible years earlier. Your money has started working harder than you are. That moment is difficult to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it yet. Because for most of our lives, we're taught that money only comes from effort. You work. You get paid. You repeat the cycle. But investing introduces a different dynamic entirely. Now your past effort continues producing results long after the work itself is finished. Every dollar you invested years ago begins generating growth, and that growth begins generating its own growth. Over time, this effect becomes incredibly powerful. What started as small contributions slowly turns into something much larger than the original effort behind it. This is why the early years matter so much. Not because the contributions are impressive, but because they give time something to work with. Time is the invisible engine behind nearly every long-term financial success story, and yet it's the one resource people underestimate the most. When you're young, decades feel endless. Retirement feels like a distant concept that belongs to someone else's life, so it's easy to delay decisions, easy to believe there will always be more time later. But time behaves differently than we expect. It moves slowly at first, then suddenly much faster. Years turn into decades before most people realize it. That's why the small decisions made early in life echo so loudly later on. A simple habit of investing regularly can become the foundation of an entire financial future. On the other hand, years of postponing that habit can create a gap that feels difficult to close later. Still, it's important to understand something encouraging. Financial progress doesn't require perfection. Very few people build wealth through flawless planning. Most people stumble along the way. They make mistakes. They start late. They pause contributions during difficult years. Life interrupts the plan more often than anyone expects. But progress doesn't require perfection. It requires persistence. The people who eventually reach financial security are rarely the ones who never faced obstacles. They're the ones who kept returning to the same simple habits after those obstacles passed. They kept saving. They kept investing. They kept allowing time to do its work. And eventually, those repeated actions create momentum. Momentum that becomes visible in ways that feel almost surprising. You begin to see your net worth climbing gradually each year. Debt shrinks. Investments expand. Your financial world becomes more stable, and stability creates something incredibly valuable. Peace of mind, not the kind of excitement that comes from sudden wealth or risky bets, but a quieter confidence. The confidence that comes from knowing your future isn't entirely dependent on tomorrow's paycheck, that your past decisions have created a safety net beneath your life. This is the real goal behind building wealth. Not luxury, not status, but freedom from constant financial pressure. Freedom to make decisions without fear controlling every outcome. Freedom to say yes to opportunities that matter. Freedom to say no to situations that don't. When people talk about reaching the number, this is what they're really describing: a point where the system they built over years finally becomes strong enough to support the life they want. And the surprising part is how ordinary that journey usually looks while it's happening. There are no dramatic headlines, no viral moments, just quiet consistency. Month after month, year after year, money flowing into investments, life continuing around it. Compounding, slowly building something meaningful. Then one day you look back and realize the distance you've traveled. The person you were years ago, wondering how everyone else seemed to be moving ahead, is no longer the person sitting at the table. Because somewhere along the way, your habits changed, your systems changed, your trajectory changed. And now the same quiet process that once felt mysterious has become something you understand deeply. You understand that wealth isn't built through dramatic moments. It's built through patience, through structure, through the willingness to do small things consistently even when they don't feel important at the time. Eventually, the results speak for themselves. And when that dinner table conversation happens again years from now, the topic of money might drift into the discussion just like it always does. Someone might casually mention they're getting close to the number. This time, you won't feel the need to do quiet math on the drive home, because you'll already know something they probably discovered years earlier. The number isn't reached in a single leap. It's reached through thousands of small decisions that quietly move your life in the same direction for a very long time. And if you've built the right system, those decisions are already happening. Right now. Even while you're busy living the rest of your life.